The sound of ripping fabric was as sharp and violent as a backfiring engine, silencing the low hum of the Havenwood diner. Amara Evans stood paralyzed, the world slowing to a crawl. Her waitress uniform, her only clean one, hung in tatters from the clenched fist of Caleb Van Doren, the millionaire who thought he owned the world. Under the buzzing fluorescent lights, the raw, scarred skin of her shoulder was exposed, and with it, the ink that told a story she never spoke of. A pair of airborne wings, a symbol of the 101st, but it was the name, etched in stark black letters just below the feathers, that made Caleb Van Doren recoil as if he'd been tasered. 30 pairs of eyes, once filled with cheap coffee and quiet desperation, were now locked on the scene. They watched the arrogant Titan's face, a mask of racist fury moments before, shatter into something utterly unrecognizable. A mosaic of shock, horror, and sickening realization. If your jaw is on the floor right now, smash that like button and subscribe, because you have absolutely no idea where this story is about to drag you. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to unearth these unforgettable tales, and trust me, you will not want to miss a single one. Now, let's rewind. Let's go back 3 days to the moment Amara's path first began to converge with the storm brewing in Havenwood. The midnight blue Aston Martin DB11 sliced through the decaying heart of downtown Havenwood like a scalpel through dying flesh. Behind the wheel, Caleb Van Doren glanced at the Patek Philippe on his wrist and surveyed his burgeoning empire through polarized glass. Everywhere he looked, his will was being made manifest. Demolition crews, like metallic ants, swarmed over half of what used to be Main Street. Historic storefronts were now just piles of brick dust and shattered memories. In their place, skeletons of steel and glass clawed at the sky. The crisp November wind whipped fallen leaves around the construction sites, a ticker tape parade celebrating his conquest. "Sir, Eleanor's diner is still refusing to cooperate." The voice of his assistant, Garrett, was a tinny whisper through the car's Bluetooth system. She hung up on me, again. Caleb's jaw clenched so tight a muscle pulsed in his cheek. The diner. The single-story brick building sat like a rotten, stubborn tooth in the perfect, gleaming smile of his master plan. Its faded red and white awnings were a personal insult. A hand-painted sign reading, "Ellie's Place Home Cookin'." Since 1986, might as well have said, "Screw you, Van Doren." "Then we proceed to the next phase," Caleb said, his voice a low growl. He parked directly across the street, the diner perfectly framed in his windshield. "I want that goddamn property, Garrett. Start filing the noise complaints from the construction sites. I want health inspectors there 3 times a day. Make her life a living hell until she is on her knees, begging me to buy her out." Through the diner's large window, he watched the woman who dared to defy him. Eleanor Ellie Vance, a 70-year-old black woman, moved with a grace that belied the immense weight on her shoulders. She wiped down tables with a methodical care honed over nearly 4 decades. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, a dusting of flour on her apron from the morning's batch of buttermilk biscuits. She was a relic, a ghost from a past he was determined to erase. Caleb stepped out of his car, a 6'2" monument to generational wealth, clad in a charcoal suit that cost more than most of the town's residents made in a month. His great-grandfather's railroad money, his grandfather's political connections, and his father's ruthless business acumen had built this empire. Caleb's role was to be the finisher, the one who would finally scour this dying town clean of its sentimentality and transform it into something sleek, profitable, and sterile. Something without the likes of Eleanor Vance cluttering up his view. The bell above the diner door jingled as he entered. The quiet chatter ceased instantly. Forks hovered in midair. Ellie looked up from the coffee pot she was refilling, and in that fleeting moment, Caleb saw her shoulders slump, a micro-expression of pure exhaustion. "We're closed for lunch prep," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not here for your food." Caleb's voice was smooth, polished, the sound of a man who had never been told no in a way that mattered. "I'm here with a final offer." Ellie set the coffee pot down. He could see a slight tremor in her hands. "I've told your man on the phone. This place isn't for sale." "Everything is for sale, Eleanor. It's just a matter of finding the right price." Caleb pulled out his smartphone, casually tapping the screen to bring up his banking app. He turned it so she could see the balance. $3 million. Transferred to your account by the end of the day. A collective gasp swept through the remaining customers. $3 million was a mythical sum in Havenwood. It could buy a person a new life, far away from the struggles of this forgotten town. Ellie's eyes widened, a flicker of shock, but then she shook her head, her resolve hardening. "This diner is my life, Mr. Van Doren. My late husband, James, built these booths with his own 2 hands. Our son took his first steps right over there by the jukebox." Her voice trembled with emotion. "You can't put a price on memories." Caleb's mask of civility began to crack. "You're being a sentimental fool. Take the money. Go retire in Florida, somewhere more appropriate for someone like you." The racist barb landed with the force of a physical blow. The diner's few remaining patrons, elderly locals who had been eating here since they were children, stirred uncomfortably, but Ellie simply drew herself up, her spine straightening as if reinforced with steel. "I said no." Caleb's smile vanished, replaced by an icy glare. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, spreading a series of photographs across the countertop. Ellie's face drained of all color. The images were of her diner, taken in the dead of night. Windows were shattered. Vile graffiti was spray-painted across the brick walls. "Sell or else" was scrawled in blood-red letters. "It's a real shame about the recent rise in vandalism," Caleb said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's a dangerous world for businesses that don't have adequate protection." Ellie's hand trembled as she reached out to touch a photo. The other customers craned their necks to see. Mrs. Gable from the Baptist church let out a horrified gasp. Old Man Hemlock, a retired fire chief, pushed his chair back and stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Are you threatening her?" he demanded. Caleb's smile was pure predator. "I'm offering solutions, Mr. Hemlock. Solutions to problems that have a tendency of getting much, much worse when people are being unreasonable." Ellie looked around at her friends, her community, and saw the fear in their eyes. They were old, vulnerable. Caleb wasn't just threatening her, he was threatening her entire world. "Get out," Ellie whispered, her voice a fragile thread of defiance. "I'll be back, with my lawyers, with the inspectors, with everything it takes to get what I want." Caleb gathered his photos, his eyes locking onto hers. "This is not over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot." The bell chimed again as he left, leaving a void of cold dread in his wake. Ellie sank onto a stool, the weight of his threat settling over her like a shroud. Outside, Caleb got back in his Aston Martin and made a call. "It's time for Phase 2, he said. "Make sure she understands what happens to people who disrespect the Van Doren name." 400 miles away, Corporal Amara Evans stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her dingy apartment bathroom. The woman staring back was 29, with deep, intelligent eyes that had seen too much. Her natural hair was pulled into a severe bun, a style dictated by military regulation that she'd never bothered to change. A constellation of faint scars from desert shrapnel mapped her left shoulder. On her back, the 101st Airborne tattoo was a permanent reminder of a life she fought every day to forget. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Rent due 2 days ago. Pay by Monday or you're evicted. Her bank account displayed a pathetic $212. Her last job, stocking shelves at a big box store, had ended abruptly when the manager said he needed someone with better customer focus, a corporate euphemism for someone who didn't wake up screaming from nightmares about IEDs and fallen comrades. She scrolled through her phone's contacts, her thumb hesitating over a name she hadn't called in years, Ellie Vance, her grandmother's best friend, the woman who had practically raised her after Grandma Rose passed. Amara hadn't spoken to her since before her first deployment, ashamed to explain why a quiet girl from a small town was suddenly running off to join the army. She'd spun a lie about a corporate job overseas, anything to avoid the truth. The phone rang 4 times before a weary voice answered. Ellie's place. Ellie? It's Amara. Amara Evans. There was a pause, then a gasp of recognition. Amara? Oh, my sweet girl. Heavens, it's been an eternity. How are you? Where in the world are you calling from? I'm doing okay, Ellie. I'm back in Chicago. How have you been? How's the diner? Oh, same old story, Ellie said, but her voice was strained, lacking its usual warmth. Keeping busy? The regulars still talk about you. Frank Hemlock was just saying last week how nobody makes a lemon meringue pie like your grandmother used to. A genuine smile touched Amara's lips. I miss that pie, and I miss Havenwood. She took a deep breath. Ellie, I've been thinking about you. That's sweet of you, honey. You were always such a thoughtful child. Have you settled down? Found a nice young man? Well, that's kind of why I'm calling. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. Ellie, I know it's been forever, and I swear I hate to ask you this, but I'm in a really tight spot. I was wondering if maybe you could loan me a little something, just until I can get back on my feet. Massive. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and uncomfortable. Oh, honey, Ellie finally said, her voice laced with an emotion Amara couldn't quite place. Now is just not a good time. The diner, it's needing some work. Things are very tight. But Amara heard something else beneath the words. It was fear. The same carefully controlled tone she'd heard from fellow soldiers on satellite calls home, trying to pretend everything was okay when they were surrounded by chaos. Ellie was trying to protect her. Ellie, what's wrong? What kind of work? You sound scared. Scared? Heavens no, baby, just tired. You know how it is. Running a business. Always something. Ellie, I've known you my whole life. This isn't your tired voice. This is your something is terribly wrong voice. Tell me what's happening. Another pause, longer this time. It's nothing for you to worry your pretty head about, sweetheart. Just some property issues. Nothing I can't handle. What kind of property issues make you sound like you're afraid to be in your own diner? It's nothing for you to worry about. I should go, honey. A customer just walked in. Ellie, wait. The line went dead. Amara stared at the phone in her hand. Ellie had never, ever hung up on her. Not once. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her worried face in the dim apartment. She typed Havenwood News into the search bar. The headlines hit her like a punch to the gut. Van Dorn Development continues aggressive downtown acquisition. Local businesses forced out by soaring property taxes. Ellie's place, the last holdout against progress. The final article featured a recent photo of Ellie standing outside her diner. She looked exhausted, defeated. Behind her, plywood was nailed over a shattered window. Amara slammed the laptop shut. She didn't hesitate. She packed her few belongings into 2 worn duffel bags, threw them into the back of her rusted-out 2004 Honda Civic, and pointed the car east toward Havenwood. Ellie had lied. Someone was hurting her, systematically breaking her down. And Amara had learned a brutal, indelible lesson in the mountains of Afghanistan. When good people are under attack, you don't send thoughts and prayers. You lock and load. The highway stretched out before her, a black ribbon leading her back to a past she'd tried to escape, and toward a confrontation she couldn't begin to imagine. In her rearview mirror, the failures of her present life grew smaller. Ahead lay a town where old wounds were about to be torn open, where buried secrets would be unearthed, and where 2 men from the same family, bound by blood but separated by an ocean of character, would unknowingly collide over the fate of one woman. But first, she had to save the woman who had been a second grandmother to her, even if it meant unleashing the soldier she had tried so hard to bury. Amara's Honda sputtered into Havenwood as the first light of dawn bled across the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. She'd driven all night, fueled by bitter gas station coffee and a cold, simmering rage. The town felt shrunken, hollowed out. Main Street was a ghost of her childhood memories, a grim corridor of vacant storefronts. Nearly every window was papered over with "for lease" signs, all bearing the same corporate logo, Van Doren Development. She parked across from Ellie's place, and her heart plummeted. The damage was worse than the news photo had shown. Plywood covered 2 large windows. Fresh, angry red graffiti screamed, "Close now," across the weathered brick. The cheerful red awning she remembered was torn and hung limply, flapping in the chill morning breeze like a broken wing. The back door creaked open, and Ellie emerged, her movements furtive and wary, like someone expecting an ambush. She was wearing a simple house dress, and the pearl earrings Amara's grandmother had left her, but the light in her eyes had been extinguished. Dark, bruised-looking circles lay beneath them. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the keys to the front door. "Ellie." Ellie spun around, a startled gasp escaping her lips. When she saw Amara standing there, a war of relief and sheer panic played out across her face. "Child, what on earth are you doing here? I told you not to come!" Amara gestured at the vandalized building. "You told me you needed work done. This doesn't look like repairs, Ellie. This looks like a war zone." Ellie's shoulders finally slumped in defeat. She glanced nervously up and down the deserted street, then beckoned Amara inside. "Quickly, before someone sees." The diner's interior was a scene of methodical destruction. It was clear someone had taken a crowbar to the place. The classic jukebox in the corner was smashed. Several tables had been overturned, their surfaces deeply scratched. The words "sell or burn" were spray-painted behind the counter. "Who did this?" Amara's voice was low, laced with the controlled fury she had learned to master in combat situations. I don't know for sure," Ellie lied, her voice strained. "Just some kids, I suppose. It happens." Amara walked over to the damaged cash register. The attack wasn't random. The hard drive for the security camera was gone, the register itself dented in a way that would require a full replacement. This was calculated. "Ellie, I've seen this before. These are intimidation tactics. Someone is trying to systematically drive you out of business." Ellie busied herself, trying to right an overturned chair. "It's nothing I can't handle. You should go home, baby. This town isn't safe for you right now. Then why are you staying?" Ellie froze, her hands gripping the back of the chair so tightly her knuckles were white. This diner, This is all I have left of him, of James. Your grandmother and I, we used to sit in a place just like this when we were girls, dreaming. James built these booths with his own hands. Our boy, Michael, he learned to count change on that very register. Tears welled in her eyes. If I sell, they win. But if I stay, they'll destroy everything. I'm trapped, Amara, and I am so tired of being afraid. Amara pulled the older woman into a fierce hug, feeling the fragility in her small frame. Ellie had always been the rock of her childhood neighborhood, the one who fed anyone who was hungry. No questions asked. Seeing her this broken ignited a protective instinct in Amara, a fire she thought had been extinguished long ago. Then you don't have to fight them alone, she said. Let me help you. You don't understand who you're dealing with, child. These people have all the money, all the power. They can make people like us disappear. Let me worry about that. I need a job and you need help. Pay me in food and whatever you can spare. Ellie pulled back, searching Amara's face. What about that corporate job? I thought you were settled. The lie felt heavy and sour in Amara's throat. She had told Ellie she was taking a job in international logistics, a vague half-truth to cover her deployment. It was easier than admitting she had joined the army to escape the feeling of being small and powerless. That job, it didn't work out. I need a new start. Ellie nodded, seeming to accept the fragile explanation. The pay won't be much. Tips are almost nothing since the trouble began. Most folks are too scared to come by. I don't need much, just a reason to get up in the morning. Ellie walked behind the damaged counter and pulled out a clean server's apron. Are you sure about this, Amara? Once you put this on, you're in this fight with me. Amara tied the apron around her waist. The simple act felt more meaningful than any uniform she had ever worn. I'm sure. They spent the morning cleaning up the wreckage, an act of defiance in itself. Ellie taught Amara the menu, pointed out the regulars' usual orders, and warned her about the wobbly leg on the table in booth 4. It was a scene of mundane restaurant training set against a backdrop of terror and intimidation. At 11:30 a.m., the first customers trickled in. Frank Hemlock, the retired fire chief, and his wife, Mary. They took a table near the back, speaking in hushed tones. A few elderly ladies from the Baptist church followed, clutching their purses and casting nervous glances towards the street. They're terrified, Amara observed, as she refilled coffee cups. They have every right to be, Ellie said. A man came in here, made it crystal clear what happens when you don't cooperate with his vision for the town. What man? Ellie's face went pale. Caleb Van Doren. His family has owned half this county for 100 years. Now he wants the other half. This diner is standing where he wants to build the entrance to his new luxury condos. Amara knew the Van Doren name. It was spoken in Havenwood with a mixture of awe and resentment. Old money. So old it was practically royalty, with a reputation for getting what it wanted, no matter the cost. Did he threaten you? He showed me pictures of the vandalism, Ellie whispered. Pictures he had to have taken before I even knew about it. He said problems have a way of getting worse if you're unreasonable. A cold rage, clean and sharp, pulsed through Amara. She had seen warlords in dusty foreign villages use the exact same script. Create the violence, then offer to sell the protection. That's extortion, she said. Around here they just call it business, Ellie replied, her voice heavy with a lifetime of resignation. The police chief? He plays golf with Caleb every Thursday afternoon. I called about the vandalism. They took a report and promised to look into it. That was a week ago. The lunch crowd remained small and on edge. People ate with a hurried efficiency, leaving exact change and avoiding conversation. The diner felt like an outpost under siege. At 1:15 p.m., the Aston Martin pulled up outside. Ellie froze, a coffee pot trembling in her hand. He's back. Amara watched Caleb Van Doren step out of his car. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and moved with the casual, predatory grace of a man who had never known a moment of doubt. His expensive suit and confident stride branded him an apex predator in this environment of prey. "Go to the kitchen, Ellie," Amara said, her voice quiet but firm. "No, he's here for me." "I've dealt with bullies like him before," Amara said, her gaze fixed on the approaching figure. "Let me handle this." Van Doren entered, as if he already owned the deed. The diner fell silent. Frank Hemlock started to get up, but his wife pulled him back down. Caleb surveyed the damage with a look of detached satisfaction, then selected a table in the center of the room, a stage from which he could command the attention of his captive audience. "Service around here just gets worse and worse," he announced to the room at large. Amara approached with a menu and a glass of water, her movements calm and professional. Her military training had taught her to read a threat posture, and this man was a walking declaration of war. "Welcome to Ellie's. What can I get for you?" He looked up, his cold blue eyes raking over her, cataloging and dismissing her in a single glance. His gaze lingered on her dark skin, her simple uniform. "Coffee? Black. And for God's sake, make sure the cup is clean. Some of us have standards." The slur was delivered with casual cruelty. Amara's expression remained a blank mask. She'd endured far worse from drill sergeants and insurgents alike. "Coming right up." She returned with the coffee. He ignored her, pulling out his phone and making a call, his voice pitched just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Garrett, cancel my 2 o'clock. I'm dealing with some local resistance. Nothing I can't handle." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. It seems some of the older residents simply don't understand the concept of progress. Ellie emerged from behind the counter, her face a mixture of fear and defiance. "Mr. Van Doren, if you're here as a customer, you're welcome. If you're here to intimidate me, I'm asking you to leave." His lips twisted into a predatory smile. "I'm just a paying customer, Eleanor. Although I did get some interesting news about your property taxes. It seems there's been a reassessment. They're going to be going up substantially." The threat, wrapped in bureaucratic language, hung in the air. Property tax manipulation was a classic weapon of financial attrition. Ellie went pale. "That's not possible. It hasn't been reassessed in a decade." "Funny how these things happen," he mused, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Of course, if you were to sell to my company, the new owners would be responsible for those tedious tax burdens." Amara watched Ellie tremble, caught between preserving her dignity and facing financial ruin. The older woman's hands twisted in her apron. "I told you, this place is not for sale." Caleb's facade of civility cracked. "You are being profoundly stupid, Eleanor. I'm offering you a clean exit, a dignified retirement. Keep pushing back, and this will get much, much uglier." "Are you threatening her?" The words were out of Amara's mouth before she could stop them. Caleb turned his full attention to her, his eyes narrowing with a look of cold amusement. "And who might you be?" "Her employee." "Her employee," he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Well, employee, perhaps you can explain the realities of modern economics to your boss. This town is moving forward, with or without her. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who resist will be ground into dust." Amara felt her training assert itself. His body language, his vocal patterns. It was pure intimidation, the kind used by men who had never faced a real fight in their lives. "It sounds like you're threatening a senior citizen over a real estate deal." "I'm discussing market forces with someone too stubborn to see them, though I suppose that's common among people who refuse to accept their station in life." The racism was no longer a subtext. It was a bludgeon. Ellie's eyes filled with tears of rage and humiliation. "That's enough," Amara said, taking a step forward. "You've made your point. Finish your coffee and get out." Caleb let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Listen to this. The help is giving orders." He rose slowly from his chair, using his height to loom over her. "Do you have any earthly idea who I am, girl? What I could do to you with a single phone call?" "I know exactly what you are." There was a quality in Amara's voice, a flat, cold certainty that made him pause. This wasn't the sound of desperate defiance. It was the sound of someone who had seen real monsters and survived, but his arrogance quickly resurfaced. "Then you know to shut your mouth and get me another cup of coffee. This one has gone cold while I've been wasting my time." He deliberately swept his arm across the table, knocking the full cup to the floor. Hot coffee splashed across the clean tiles, a dark, spreading stain. "Clean that up," he commanded, his voice dripping with contempt. "And this time, do it right." The diner was utterly silent, save for the drip, drip, drip of coffee from the edge of the table. This was it. The moment of truth. The point where everyone in the room would choose a side, even if that choice was silence. Amara looked at Ellie and saw the war in her eyes, the lifetime of swallowing indignities fighting against the instinct to protect her. She looked at Frank and Mary, at the church ladies, at all the people who had watched their town be dismantled piece by piece. Then she looked back at Caleb Van Doren, and a cold, disciplined calm settled over her. "No." The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a grenade. Caleb's face cycled through a spectrum of colors, flushed red, then pale white, then a deeper, more dangerous crimson. In his 35 years of privileged existence, no one in a service position had ever refused him. "Excuse me," he whispered, a sound far more menacing than a shout. Amara didn't flinch. "I said no, you made the mess. You can clean it up." Frank Hemlock started to rise again, but his wife's hand on his arm was a vice. The church ladies began to whisper frantic prayers. Ellie stepped forward, her face a mask of terror and fierce pride. "Amara, please, just do it!" "No, Ellie. He did this on purpose. He can live with it." Caleb's laugh was a strangled, ugly sound. "Do you realize what you've just done? I own this town. I own the bank that holds the mortgage on this shack. I could have this building condemned tomorrow." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "And you're a nameless, faceless nobody. You think you can say no to me?" "I just did." The simple finality of her words seemed to short-circuit his brain. His carefully constructed world of command and control had just been breached. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he seethed. "I can make one call and have you thrown in jail for trespassing. I can make another and ensure you never work in this state again. I will ruin your pathetic little life." Amara's expression didn't change. She had heard the same empty threats from men who held actual power over life and death. Men who, in the end, had bled just like everyone else. "Are you finished?" His eyes bulged. "Finished! I haven't even begun!" He pulled out his phone, dialing with furious, stabbing motions. "Chief Brody, Caleb Van Doren. I'm at Ellie's diner. I'm being threatened by a hostile employee. Yes, threatened. She's unstable, possibly dangerous." Ellie gasped. "Caleb, that's a lie." "Is it?" His smile was a vicious slash. "She refused a direct order. She's acting erratically. I feel unsafe." He was creating a narrative, a false report backed by institutional power. It was a classic move. "Call whoever you want," Amara said, her voice steady. "The truth is still the truth." Caleb's face contorted in frustration as he listened to his phone. "What do you mean he's on another call? I don't give a damn about a fender bender on the interstate. This is a priority." He hung up, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. His immediate backup wasn't coming. He would have to handle this humiliation personally. "You think you're so clever?" he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The brave little waitress standing up to the big bad millionaire. It's pathetic." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping so only Amara and Ellie could hear. "Here's what's going to happen now. You are going to apologize to me, then you are going to get on your hands and knees and clean up that mess, and then you are going to leave this town and never come back, because if you don't, I will unleash hell on your friend Eleanor. You think the vandalism was bad?" He gestured around the diner. "That was a friendly warning. You keep pushing me, and she will lose everything. This building, her home, her savings, everything. All because you couldn't keep your stupid mouth shut." Ellie turned to Amara, her eyes pleading. "Amara, please, just do what he says." That plea cut Amara deeper than any of Caleb's threats. She saw the impossible position she had forced upon Ellie. To fight back was to invite destruction upon the very person she was trying to protect. "See?" Caleb's confidence swelled. "Ellie understands how the world works. You should listen to her." Amara looked around the diner. Everyone was staring at their plates, at the salt shakers, anywhere but at her. They all knew this was wrong, and none of them could do a damn thing to stop it. This is how bullies win, she thought. They don't win with strength. They win by making the cost of resistance unbearable. They turn you into an accomplice in your own destruction. "What's it going to be?" Caleb tapped his Patek Philippe. "I have a board meeting at 3. We can end this now, or I can start making calls that will end Eleanor's life as she knows it." Amara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Every cell in her body, every ounce of her training screamed at her to fight, to neutralize the threat. But this wasn't a battlefield. Ellie wasn't a soldier. She was a civilian casualty in a war she never asked to fight. "I'm waiting," Caleb said, savoring his victory. Ellie placed a gentle hand on Amara's arm. "It's okay, baby. It's okay." The resignation in Ellie's voice broke something inside Amara. This was why she'd joined the army, to stand between the innocent and the monsters. And here she was, not just powerless, but a liability, a weapon being used against her own side. Slowly, deliberately, Amara walked to the supply closet. She returned with a mop and a towel. The diner was so quiet you could hear the coffee dripping onto the floor, each drop a tiny hammer blow of defeat. She knelt and began to clean. The brown stain seemed to spread as she worked, a physical manifestation of her humiliation. Caleb watched, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "There, that's better. See how simple life can be when people know their place?" Amara said nothing. She focused on the task, trying to contain the storm raging inside her. She had retreated. She had surrendered. She had let a racist, arrogant monster win. In Afghanistan, the lines had been so much clearer. The enemy wore a different uniform. Here, the enemy wore a tailored suit and used an old woman's life as a weapon. "Now apologize," Caleb said. Amara froze. "What?" "Apologize. For your insolence, I want to hear you say you're sorry for forgetting who you are." "Caleb, that's enough," Ellie pleaded. "She cleaned it up." "No, it's not enough. She disrespected me. She needs to learn that actions have consequences." Amara stood up slowly, the dirty mop handle clenched in her fist. The water dripped onto her worn-out sneakers. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't hear you." "I'm sorry." The words were acid in her throat. "Sorry for what, precisely?" Caleb pressed, twisting the knife. This was the moment she understood. He didn't just want her obedience. He wanted to shatter her spirit. He wanted to strip her of every last shred of dignity until she was too broken to ever stand up again. It was a form of psychological warfare she had seen used on prisoners. The goal wasn't compliance, it was annihilation of the soul. "I'm sorry," Amara forced the words out, "for being disrespectful, and for forgetting my place." "Good girl," he said, his voice sickeningly patronizing. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a single crisp dollar bill, and let it flutter down onto the wet, clean floor. "For your troubles." The insult was absolute. The customers stared at their plates, their silence a chorus of shame. Caleb straightened his tie. "Eleanor, you have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to accept my final offer. $3 million. After that, the offer is off the table, and I will take this building through foreclosure for whatever pittance the bank decides it's worth." He walked to the door, then paused, turning back. "Oh, and if your new employee here steps out of line again, I will assume it was with your encouragement, and I will respond accordingly." The bell chimed. He was gone. Through the window, they watched him get into his car and make another call, a triumphant smile on his face. Ellie sank into a chair, looking as though she had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," Amara said, and this time she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I made everything so much worse." Ellie shook her head slowly. "No, baby," she whispered. "For a minute there, you made me remember what it felt like to fight back. I just can't afford to feel that way anymore." Frank Hemlock finally stood, his face a mask of shame and fury. "That was wrong. What he did to both of you. It was just wrong." "But we all just sat here," his wife Mary added, her voice trembling. "We watched it happen." "He owns us," Ellie said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He owns our homes, our businesses, our children's futures. You cross Caleb Van Doren, and you don't just lose. You get erased." Amara finished cleaning the floor, her hands shaking. She thought she had left the war behind her. She thought she could find some measure of peace in a quiet life. But the war was everywhere. The monsters just wore different uniforms. Outside, the Aston Martin sped away, but its shadow lingered, a poisonous blight over the diner. Tomorrow morning would come, and with it, an ultimatum. And Amara had to decide if fighting for what was right was worth the cost of destroying the one person she had come here to save. What do you think Amara learned in the military that will help her fight a man like Van Doren? Drop your theories in the comments, and stick with us, because the real battle is just beginning. The afternoon crowd vanished. By 3 o'clock, the diner was a tomb. "You should go," Ellie said, her voice a ghost of its former self. "Pack your bags tonight. Be gone before he comes back in the morning. I'll give you what cash I have for gas." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to." He meant every word of what he said. "And believe me, baby, it can get so much worse." Amara looked at the smashed jukebox, the graffiti, Ellie's exhausted and broken face, and the single mocking dollar bill still lying on the floor. "What if there's another way?" she asked. "There isn't," Ellie said with finality. "Men like Caleb Van Doren always win. That's just how the world works." But Amara had learned a different lesson in the mountains and deserts halfway across the world. The world only worked that way because good people decided it was easier to surrender than to fight. Evil only won because no one was willing to pay the butcher's bill to stop it. And sometimes, when you were outgunned and outmaneuvered, you had to stop playing by the enemy's rules and start writing your own. She picked up Caleb's dollar bill, folded it into a neat, small square, and tucked it into her pocket. It was a reminder, a promise, a declaration of war. Tomorrow Caleb would return for Ellie's surrender. He was expecting either a signature on a contract or another round of predictable, futile defiance. He wasn't expecting a counterinsurgency. He wasn't expecting a soldier with nothing left to lose and a very particular set of skills for dealing with bullies who believed they were untouchable. This was far from over. The November sky opened up just after dark, a cold, miserable rain that turned Main Street into a slick mirror of neon and gloom. Amara sat in her Honda, watching the water sheet down the windshield. She'd been parked across from the diner for hours, the folded dollar bill a hard, square presence in her pocket. Ellie had closed up early, pressing a spare key into Amara's hand. "Lock up when you're done thinking," she'd said. "And please, Amara, be gone by sunrise." But leaving felt like desertion. Caleb's absolute confidence was a red flag. Men that certain of their power didn't leave things to chance. They had contingency plans. At 8:30 p.m., headlights cut through the downpour. A nondescript white van with no markings pulled up next to a dark sedan already parked in the shadows. Amara slid down in her seat, heart pounding. 3 men got out. She recognized the thick, imposing figure of Police Chief Brody from the newspaper. The other 2 were dressed like city contractors and moved with the grim efficiency of men on a mission. One carried a heavy toolbox, the other a clipboard. They moved to the diner's back door. Brody produced a key he had no right to possess, and they let themselves in. Lights flickered on inside, first in the kitchen, then in the main dining area. Amara's training took over. Surveillance, reconnaissance. She raised her phone, shielded it from the rain, and started recording video through the streaked glass. Whatever this was, it needed to be documented. For 20 minutes, she watched their silhouettes move about. They seemed to be installing something, tampering with the electrical panels behind the counter and the gas lines leading to the stove. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop watching." The blood in her veins turned to ice. They knew she was here. Someone was watching her watch them. She scanned the street, the dark windows of the abandoned shops. The passenger window of the sedan was cracked open, a dark slit in the rainy night. Another text. "Come inside now, or we call this in as a B&E." The same tactic. False accusations backed by official power. She was caught. She had a key, yes, but her presence here, at this time of night, was deeply suspicious. Amara checked her phone's battery, ensured the video was uploading to a secure cloud server, and then got out of her car. She walked through the cold rain to the front door, the key feeling alien in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was steady as she entered. "Evening, Chief." Chief Brody looked up from the electrical panel he was tampering with. He was a man in his 50s who had gone soft around the middle, his face a road map of broken capillaries. "Ms. Evans, isn't it? Mr. Van Doren mentioned you might be a problem." "Just checking on the place for Ellie," she said, her eyes scanning the room, noting the new devices they were installing. "Making sure it's secure." "How considerate," Brody said with an oily smile. "Actually, you've arrived just in time. We're in the middle of an emergency safety inspection. We're finding some very serious code violations." The 2 contractors ignored her, one attaching a new meter to the gas line, the other taking detailed photographs of the ancient wiring. "A safety inspection? At 9 o'clock at night? In a rainstorm?" Amara kept her voice level, betraying nothing. "Emergencies don't keep business hours," Brody replied smoothly. "Can't have an unsafe building like this endangering the public, can we?" Amara recognized the playbook instantly. Fabricate violations, create official-looking reports, and use them as leverage for condemnation or forced closure. She'd seen corrupt officials in occupied territories run the exact same scam. "What violations, specifically?" Brody gestured vaguely towards the kitchen. Faulty wiring, signs of a gas leak, potential structural weaknesses. The kind of things that could cause a catastrophic fire if left unaddressed. This place passed a full inspection 4 months ago. Things deteriorate, Brody said, picking up his clipboard. The good news is, Van Doren Development has offered to bring in an emergency crew. They could have this place up to code by tomorrow evening. For a price, I'm sure. Well, safety isn't cheap, Brody said, but I imagine Mr. Van Doren would be willing to absorb the costs if Eleanor were to reconsider his generous purchase offer. The extortion was multi-layered, sophisticated. Create a crisis, offer a solution that was financially impossible, and present the buyout as the only logical escape. If Ellie refused, they would condemn the building and seize it under the guise of public safety. Can I see the report? Brody's expression hardened. This is an active investigation. The report is confidential until it's filed, but I can tell you the preliminary findings are dire. One of the contractors called out from the kitchen. Chief, you better come look at this. They walked back to the kitchen. The man was kneeling by the main gas line, holding a small beeping device. We got a live one, the man announced gravely. Small gas leak, but it's been active for some time. This whole place could have gone up. It was a performance, a well-rehearsed piece of theater. The detector was aimed at a joint that had been secure for 40 years. The leak was being conveniently discovered by the very men who had the tools to create one. That's odd, Amara said. Ellie's been cooking on that stove every day for decades. These things happen, Brody said with a shrug. Lucky we caught it when we did. The contractor made a show of fiddling with the connection. Gonna need a full replacement of this line. Probably run you $25,000 parts and labor. $25,000. Money Ellie couldn't even dream of. Of course, Brody added helpfully. If the building were to change hands, all repair costs would become the responsibility of the new owner. It would save Ellie a lot of trouble. Amara watched the whole charade, the manufactured crisis, the predatory solution. These men were professionals. They had dismantled other lives, other businesses, with this same cold, bureaucratic cruelty. How did you get a key? She asked, changing the subject. Brody's smile was thin. The city has master keys for all commercial properties, for emergencies. And Mr. Van Doren was the one who reported this emergency? Mr. Van Doren is a concerned citizen, Brody said, his eyes like chips of ice. We take reports of potential safety hazards very seriously. The second contractor finished his photography, creating a robust file of false evidence to support their fabricated story. Amara's phone vibrated. Another text from the unknown number. The video won't help you. Delete it. She glanced around the diner. Brody was watching her. The contractors were busy, but someone else knew. Someone was directing this. Problem with your phone? Brody asked. Just checking the time, she said. It's getting late. Safety never sleeps. The rain hammered against the boarded-up windows. She was trapped. Leaving now would be an admission of guilt. Staying meant being a witness to the framing of an innocent woman. Mr. Van Doren mentioned you're new in town, Brody said, his tone conversational. Looking for work, are you? I found work. For now, he said, the threat unmistakable. This place won't be open much longer, what with all these safety issues. You understand? They were trying to buy her, offering her a job, a way out, in exchange for her silence. I appreciate the thought, she said. But I'm good right here. Brody shrugged. Your funeral. Might want to think about what happens to employees of businesses that go under. Unemployment doesn't last forever. The contractor called out again. Chief, I'm seeing some rot in the support beams near the foundation. More lies. More fabricated evidence. By morning, they would have a report so damning that Ellie would have no choice but to sell or be shut down forever. Brody walked toward the back of the diner, leaving Amara alone for a moment. She quickly scanned the room, her eyes searching for the source of the texts. And then she saw it. Tucked away among the coffee mugs behind the counter, a tiny black device with a single blinking red light. A camera. A listening device. They were watching and hearing everything. Another text. Smart girl. Delete the recording. Walk away and forget this happened. Amara typed a reply. Who is this? Someone who can make your life very easy or very, very hard. The device was professional grade, not something a small-town police chief would have. This operation was bigger, better funded. Caleb Van Doren had brought in specialists. The contractors emerged from the back. All set, Chief. I'll have the full report on your desk by 6 a.m. Brody nodded, then turned to Amara. Well, Ms. Evans, you've had a front-row seat to an official city safety inspection. I trust you'll impress upon Eleanor the gravity of the situation. Oh, I understand exactly what I've witnessed, she said, her voice flat. Good. Then you'll advise her to make the sensible choice tomorrow, for everyone's safety. He paused at the door. And one more thing. This inspection, and everything we've discussed, is confidential. Interfering with an active investigation is a serious felony. Another threat. Silence her, or face prison. They had covered all their bases. I understand, Amara said. Brody smiled, a predator who knew he had his prey cornered. He and his team vanished into the rain-swept night. Amara was left alone in the silent diner, the little red light blinking at her from behind the counter. A malevolent eye. Caleb would know every word spoken in this room from now on. She walked directly to the counter and stared into the hidden lens. You missed something, she said, her voice clear and steady, speaking to the man she knew was watching. She pulled the folded dollar bill from her pocket. She carefully unfolded it and placed it on the counter, directly in the camera's line of sight. I served 18 months in Kandahar province, she said. I know what an occupation looks like. I know what happens when bullies think they have absolute power, and I know what it takes to make them stop. She walked to the door, then turned back to face the camera one last time. Tomorrow, Ellie is going to refuse your offer, and you're going to have to decide just how far you're willing to go, because I've already decided how far I am. She stepped out into the rain, the darkness swallowing her whole. She got in her car and sat there for another hour, the engine silent, watching the diner. Caleb wasn't just a greedy developer. He was an occupying force, using corruption, fear, and manufactured crises as his weapons of war. The people of Havenwood had been fighting him on his terms, trying to use laws he controlled and appealing to a sense of decency he didn't possess. But Amara knew a different kind of warfare. Asymmetric warfare. The art of turning a powerful enemy's strengths into his greatest weaknesses. Tomorrow, Caleb would arrive expecting a surrender. He wasn't expecting a counteroffensive. He wasn't expecting someone who knew how to dismantle an insurgency from the inside out. The rules of the game were about to change. Amara didn't sleep. She sat in her car, the rhythmic sweep of the wipers a hypnotic metronome, and thought about Afghanistan. She thought about a small village called Tarin Kaut, caught in the crossfire between a corrupt warlord and the Taliban. The warlord, a man named Gul Aga, had used the same playbook as Caleb Van Doren: manufactured threats, corrupt officials, and relentless economic pressure until the villagers broke and gave him whatever he wanted. Amara had been part of a special operations team tasked with neutralizing him. The army's initial approach had been conventional: gather intelligence, build a case, work through the official Afghan channels. It was a slow, frustrating process, and while they followed protocol, 2 more villages were burned to the ground. The breakthrough came when her commanding officer had told them to stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like Gul Aga's business competitors. Her phone rang at exactly 6:00 a.m. It was Ellie. "Amara, thank God you're still here. Something awful has happened." "What is it, Ellie?" "Chief Brody just called. He said there was an emergency inspection last night. He said they found everything. Gas leaks, faulty wiring, structural damage. He said they're condemning the building. They're shutting me down." Her voice cracked. "He said I can't reopen until I can pay for the repairs." "How much?" Amara asked, her voice cold. $32,000, Ellie sobbed, "for problems that didn't exist yesterday. He said the only way to avoid it is if I sell to Van Doren, that they'd handle all the repairs as part of the sale." "Where are you?" "I'm at the diner. They've already posted the notice." Amara drove the 2 blocks to the diner. A large, official-looking red sign was plastered across the front door. "Closed by order of the Havenwood Department of Building and Safety. Unsafe conditions." Inside, Ellie was surrounded by cardboard boxes, her movements slow and defeated. She was packing photos from the wall, surrendering before the final battle had even been fought. "It's over," she said, not looking up. 40 years, and it's over just like that. He won." "No, he hasn't." Amara walked to the door and examined the condemnation notice. It was detailed, filled with intimidating legal jargon. "This notice," she said, her voice sharp with discovery. "It's dated yesterday at 10:00 p.m. Ellie looked up, confused. "What?" "Look at the timestamp. This was written and signed 2 hours before Brody and his men even finished their inspection. They wrote up the condemnation before they even pretended to find the violations." Ellie stared at the document, despair slowly being replaced by confusion. Then a flicker of anger. "That doesn't make any sense." "It makes perfect sense," Amara said, pulling out her phone. She showed Ellie the video she had recorded. "I was here, Ellie. I watched them. I have them on video planting the evidence they're using against you." Ellie's eyes widened as she watched the footage. Chief Brody directing his men. The installation of the surveillance device. The entire choreographed performance. "They're criminals," she whispered. "They're businessmen who use criminal tactics," Amara corrected, "and that distinction is important if we're going to stop them." She sat Ellie down amidst the boxes. It was time for the whole truth. "Ellie, I lied to you. About why I left Havenwood, about the job overseas. I didn't move away for a corporate job. I joined the army. I did 2 tours in Afghanistan." Ellie's face was a canvas of hurt and confusion. "Why would you lie to me about that, child?" "Because I was ashamed," Amara admitted, the words tasting like poison. "I felt like a failure. The small-town girl who couldn't find her way, running off to be a soldier. But it wasn't a failure, Ellie. It was an education. I learned things over there. Things about how men like Caleb Van Doren operate. How they use fear and corruption to control people. And I learned how to stop them." She pulled up photos on her phone. Images from her deployments. Convoys moving through dusty mountain passes. Meetings with village elders. And one photo that made Ellie gasp. A younger Amara, clad in combat gear, standing amidst the ruins of a burned-out village, her face grim. "This is Taran Kaut," she said. "It was run by a warlord who used the exact same tactics as Caleb. Manufactured crises, corrupt police, economic warfare. He bled those people dry." "What happened to them?" Ellie asked, her eyes fixed on the photo. "They fought back, but first they had to learn they were fighting the wrong war." Amara swiped to another photo. The same village, 6 months later, rebuilt and bustling with life. "How?" "By understanding that the warlord wasn't all-powerful. He just seemed that way because no one knew how to fight him. Once we identified his real weaknesses, he was easy to take down." Ellie looked around her condemned diner, a spark of hope in her eyes for the first time in weeks. "What are his weaknesses?" "The same ones Caleb has," Amara said, standing and beginning to pace, the soldier taking over. Arrogance, over-reliance on a corrupt network, and the absolute certainty that his victims will never, ever fight back intelligently. She picked up the condemnation notice. This is his corruption. She pointed toward the damaged tables. This is his economic pressure. She then pointed to the hidden camera. And that is his fear. He wants you to feel like you are always being watched, that resistance is impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. I see you're showing her the vacation photos. Cute. Delete the evidence and leave town. Final warning. She showed the message to Ellie. They're listening to us right now. Isn't that a bad thing? Ellie stammered. Only if we let it be, Amara said with a grim smile. If we know they're listening, we can control the narrative. We can feed them exactly what we want them to hear. She walked over to the hidden camera and spoke directly to it. Caleb, I know you can hear me. Ellie is going to refuse your offer today, and this time she's not alone. She let the silence hang in the air for a moment. You think you're up against a tired old woman and a down-on-her-luck waitress? You're wrong. You're up against someone who spent 18 months learning how to dismantle organizations exactly like yours. Ellie watched, mesmerized. In Afghanistan, Amara continued, her voice cold and clear, we had a saying, know your enemy. So let me tell you what I know about you, Caleb. You're a coward who inherited power but never earned respect. You use cruelty to feel strong because you've never accomplished anything on your own, and you have never, not once in your pampered life, faced real resistance. That ends today. She stepped away from the camera, turning back to Ellie. In Taran Kaut, the warlord made the same mistake. He expected people to keep fighting him on his terms, to appeal to the officials he owned, to play fair in a rigged game. What did you do instead? We stopped playing his game, Amara said. He expected a fight, so we gave him economic competition. He expected us to go through the corrupt local government, so we went around them, straight to the national level. We made him react to us. She opened her laptop. And that's what we're going to do now. What are you doing? Research, Amara said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Every corrupt enterprise has vulnerabilities. Shell corporations, tax discrepancies, building code violations on their own properties. It's all public record, if you know where to look. An hour later, Amara had compiled a damning dossier. A web of LLCs designed to hide assets, tax assessments on Van Doren's own buildings that were laughably low, a clear pattern of corruption that, if exposed correctly, could bring the entire empire crashing down. This is amazing, Ellie said, reading over her shoulder. It's just intelligence gathering, Amara replied. Her phone rang. Caleb's number. Answer it, she said to Ellie. Put it on speaker. Ellie's hand trembled as she answered. Hello? Eleanor. Caleb's voice was slick with false concern. I trust you've seen the condemnation notice. In light of this unfortunate development, I'm prepared to make one final compassionate offer, $1.5 million, and I'll handle all the safety issues at my own expense. That's generous, Ellie said, looking at Amara for guidance. It is, Caleb said, especially since Chief Brody tells me you could be facing criminal negligence charges. Ellie took a deep breath. Before I consider your offer, I have a question. Is it true that your primary holding company, Van Doren Lux, filed tax documents last year claiming this property was only worth $300,000 for depreciation purposes? There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I don't know what you're talking about. Tax fraud, Amara called out, loud enough for the phone to pick up. That's a federal offense, especially when it's part of a multi-property scheme to defraud the IRS. Another silence, thick with menace. Who is that? My new business advisor, Ellie said, a new strength in her voice. She's been looking over your proposal. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Caleb snarled, his voice tight with fury. "We're settling this now." He hung up. Ellie looked at Amara, a new light in her eyes. "He's rattled." "Good," Amara said. "Rattled men make mistakes." "What happens when he gets here?" Amara smiled. "We find out what a bully does when his victim suddenly grows a spine." Outside, the storm clouds were gathering again as Caleb's Aston Martin tore through the streets of Havenwood, racing toward a confrontation he thought he controlled. Inside the diner, two women prepared for a different kind of war, armed with weapons he had never learned to counter: intelligence, strategy, and the unshakable conviction of a righteous cause. The real battle was about to begin.